Welcome to the Idle Talk podcast. My name is Peyton, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jacob. If you're not familiar, this is a podcast about Survivor, and this week we're talking about Survivor 47, Episode 7, Our Pickle on Blast is the name of the episode.
That's what it's called?
Yep. Our Pickle on Blast.
Who says that?
Tiana at Tribal Council. She says, Jeff, you're putting our pickle on blast.
Okay.
And so that's the name of the episode. Honestly, kind of an iconic episode name. She was basically saying that he was shining a spotlight on their conundrum.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, I do remember her saying
Besides the point. Doesn't matter. We're discussing that episode. Spoiler alert. If you have not seen that episode, now you know Tiana is at Tribal Council. More spoilers ahead. I would recommend watching the episode before listening any further.
Tiana being at Tribal Council isn't exactly a spoiler. Everyone was at Tribal Council.
Kind of. You've been warned. Now, this week's a little bit different than previous weeks. In previous weeks, Jacob and I both watched the episode live and at the same time, and then we either record immediately after the episode or next day or sometime soon after. But we both have the same amount of information going into the recording. This week was a little bit different, where I just now finished watching the episode. But Jacob, you watched it live, and at the time of recording, that was 24 hours ago. And
Yes.
So you have 24 hours of sitting on the episode, absorbing Survivor Twitter, and potentially Survivor Reddit or wherever else on the internet. People are discussing
Reddit at
Survivor.
work.
So you have seen commentary about Survivor and conversations about it in the public sphere. Whereas I'm coming into this just very blind with only my thoughts and gut reaction. What do you think about this episode now that you've had 24 hours to sit on it and think about it? And then from there, we can kind of have a bit of a discussion because I've just walked out of it.
So, what I have drawn from this episode, and especially in the 24 hours that I've spent looking at Reddit and reading everyone's thoughts and opinions about this episode, is this episode feels like a microcosm into the new era format. And what I mean by that is there is a specific point in the episode when Rachel gets this advantage and she gets to walk away from Tribal Council scot-free. Mm-hmm. And then the remaining people are just left to figure out and deal with this mess. And there are kind of two sides to this equation where you have people on one side saying that they love the randomness and the way that this can like flip the game on its head, and they like the kind of danger that it ensues and that it kind of like forces the best player to come out because the best player would be able to like adapt to these situations, but forces players to like be on their A game. And then you have the other side of this equation where people are saying, yes, randomness is fun and necessary, but there are some times where the forced randomness and these advantages take out strategy and they make it entirely reliant on finding advantages, and they don't rely on strategy and gameplay. And that these new advantages and the new era as a whole has become about finding advantages and finding the best advantage and playing the right advantage, and not actually about real strategy. And so I think after sitting with the episode for a day, I'm starting to lean towards the side of I didn't really love the way it played out. I thought it was a fun episode, but I didn't love the strategy of it because I think you see it so plainly with the way that Tiana went home, and that it truly did not feel fair. It felt so unfair that she went home. All because Sol found this advantage and gave it to Rachel, and Rachel got to leave and not participate in tribal. And I know that Survivor isn't supposed to be fair. It's not a fair game, and you have to have a severe amount of luck in order to win, and luck plays a huge factor in the game. But I personally, with this whole situation, I just don't feel like that advantage was the right advantage to be planted in this situation. And it almost, I know it wasn't, and I know that they had probably had an idea of what they were going to do with this advantage before the swaps happened. But the way that the advantage played out, and the fact that it was the Tukus and Rachel, and that it was more likely than not that whoever was going to get the advantage was going to give it to Rachel to force the Tukus to turn on each other, to force the 5 Tukus to turn on each other. It felt very crafted and not authentic, and didn't feel like a natural progression of the game. And so for those reasons, I didn't love it. I don't know what your immediate thoughts were after seeing it unfold, but it just didn't feel like it makes it feel like Survivor isn't about the strategy.
Yeah.
Because it sucks it's that advantage sucks any strategy out of that situation.
Yeah. I would almost counter, and this is just maybe playing devil's advocate a little bit. So, like, obviously, like you could say Tiana was disadvantaged there and maybe didn't deserve to go home, but and like she couldn't do anything in that scenario, right? But couldn't you say the same thing if it was Rachel who went home? Like, Rachel was put in that situation by randomness, that she was 1v5, and in that scenario, she would have been the one going home. And so it would have been the exact same thing where she is now the random one going home. But I think with Tiana, it's not as random, right? It's not an easy out. There's strategy now. People are having to take sides and pick someone to go home. Whereas before, Rachel was going to be the one going home for sure. And I think based on the way everything played out, we can tell that Rachel was going to be the one going home ultimately.
Yeah, I would have assumed she was going to go home.
And so, even though I think they really wanted us to think that it could have been a toss-up, I think at the end of the day, they were going to just play it safe and send Rachel home. And so, I would say that, like, if Rachel went home, that is worse than Tiana going home. Like, Tiana going home, I think kind of sucks because it was showier and it is like impacted by an advantage per se, right? But another player did play that advantage, right? And they chose who they played it for. Like, they could have not picked Rachel. So Saul could have picked anyone over there. And then they chose Rachel. And then Rachel had 2 options. Rachel chose to leave. So it was like one choice and then a second choice. And then after that, as a group, they have to make another choice. And so that is sort of my immediate reaction, in that there were a sequence of events that all happened and led to Tiana going home. Whereas Rachel going home ultimately would have been caused by a rock draw. And one of those 6 people not lasting the longest.
Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately would have decided her fate. And so to me, going home via a rock draw is worse than that series of events. Either one is not, like, I don't think that either one is ideal, given how much we want it to just kind of be Survivor and be strategy. But if we're taking that out of the equation, and those are the 2 scenarios we're presented, I would rather the sequence of events than just rock draw. She's screwed. She's going home.
When I was listening to On Fire, something that Jeff said that kind of stuck with me was the point of them doing the rock. Obviously, you haven't gotten a chance to listen to On Fire, but like the point of the rock draw is to obviously induce randomness. And he was especially saying, like, the point is of like randomness is someone could be like at the top of the tribe, top of their game, and then they're put in a new temporary tribe and they're on the bottom and they have to figure out how to get out of this situation. Which, like, I understand that if you want like the best player to win, then the best player would be able to get out of that situation. Mm-hmm. So I understand that. But then he starts going on to say like, oh, and then the randomness introduces danger, and in Survivor, danger equals fun. And that's something that we talked about and he keeps hammering. But the fact that he has been saying like the point of this new era has been dangerous fun. But what he said this time that I didn't really like was he said danger is fun. And I don't agree with that sentiment. I don't agree that danger is inherently fun. I think it can be entertaining danger. Like, I think there's room for danger to be not entertaining.
I would say I think danger is fun for the audience. I don't think danger is fun for the players. And
that's what he said. Yeah. He said it's fun for the players, and I don't agree.
Yeah, I think that it probably isn't fun for the players, especially in the moment where they're presented with twists.
Do you want to know what the odds were of Rachel getting stuck with the entire Tuku tribe?
Sure.
It was 0.85%.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. When the groups got split up, I was very surprised at the way it shaked out. And I was really hoping that it was going to be the other group that lost, because I felt like that was just going to be so much more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I did think there was a chance for there to be cracks over on the Tuku side. And I was like, it probably means Gabe goes home unless Kyle doesn't win. And then Kyle ended up winning. But then they all went. And I was like, okay, maybe Gabe, but it's probably just Rachel. And so there's a lot less excitement. Whereas in the Lavo 3 versus the Gata 3, Andy is a clear crack, and I think that there would have been a blind side. And so that would have been a lot of fun to see, depending on who, and it would have also depended on who actually finished and got the individual immunity out of them and all that sort of stuff. I think could have been really interesting to see. Obviously, we didn't get that. One thing I do want to ask you, because obviously you've had time to sit on this and you've seen other people's reactions. This is a new take on the split tribal council. And so in the past, split tribal was literally the tribes would be split up. One tribe, it was like whoever won the challenge, like they would get the reward and they would go second. And so that's kind of their advantage. Both tribes had to vote someone out, and both tribes had one person who was safe. And that was the way that it was framed. So there were equal amounts of danger on both sides. Here, it's different in that half of them are safe, so it feels almost like Mergatory in that sense, like what we normally would see in the Mergatory, where they would split them, but they don't get a vote. They don't even get to communicate. They're completely isolated. And now the 6 who are separated and going to tribal, one of them is safe. And so now there's only 5 people on the chopping block. And so it's just half of what we previously had. And so it's a little weird where it's like we're doing the split tribal, but only one of those 2 split tribals. So instead of 2 people going home, it's just 1. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, or if the Survivor community as a whole likes this more than previous split tribals, or if they like it less, or if it's just the same sentiment.
I haven't really seen a whole lot about it because it doesn't really feel that different. Like, yeah, one less person is going home, but it doesn't feel different because they're still getting split at tribal. It's just that the other group doesn't go to tribal. So I kind of just felt indifferent to it. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. And I wasn't like, okay, this is even worse than what it was. I was just kind of like, okay, I guess this is the way we're doing it this season. I was just kind of meh about it, honestly.
Something that I didn't like about this new setup between the splitting of the tribes is that Kyle was safe out of the 6 available options to go home. It makes sense to have someone on your side be safe when both sides are having to go to tribal, but it doesn't totally make sense to me why you want someone there to have individual immunity when you already have 6 people who have essentially individual immunity. I think I might have liked it a little bit more if just they found a way to make all of them unsafe, because having one more person over there who essentially is just a vote, they're not in any danger, it feels like it takes away from the strategy. And especially when Rachel is able to get up and leave, and now Kyle, you can't vote for him. And so there are only a few options left at that point. There's 4 options, and Sue and Caroline are not voting for one another. And that ultimately leaves 2 choices, which it kind of always was. I think if Kyle didn't have the necklace, I think Kyle would have come into that conversation because he's really good at physical challenges. And you open up your options. Would Tiana still have ultimately been the vote? I think probably. But I think that the dynamics of everything change a lot. And so I think that's my biggest gripe with it. I still don't like the split tribal setup as a whole, but especially the way they did this, I don't understand why you have one of them with individual immunity if you already know you're going to be sending another advantage that could remove them entirely. That seems like a poor decision to make. Like, I understand you need incentive to keep them there the whole time.
I mean, it eliminates a third of the available, like if you break it down into percentages, it's a third of the available people who could be eligible to be voted out.
Yeah.
Not eligible to be voted out.
Yeah. And I think that it is even more of it's less of an issue here, given the tribal we got. I think it would have been more of an issue if we got the other group where it's an even split. If one of them was safe and then one of them was able to leave, we don't know who that would have been, but that I think that could have really thrown a wrench into the mechanics of how that all works out. And that was a far more likely scenario across the board, it being a much more even split. Because the odds of it being 5-1, very low.
Yeah. I saw a tweet from Steven Fishback, who does the Know It All podcast with Rob. And he was trying to get input on this whole situation. And he essentially tweeted the 2 sides that I was trying to convey earlier, which he says, was last night's Survivor a thrilling example of how the game's twists can have heartbreaking payoff, or yet more proof that modern Survivor's advantage-heavy randomness saps the strategic essence of the series? And I feel like that perfectly sums up the whole conversation surrounding this episode.
Yeah. And I think maybe the last thing I would want to bring up before we move on just kind of into the episode and hit some of the main talking points and highlights of the episode itself would be actually on that topic. I can't think of anyone in the new era aside from Marianne who truly used in-game advantages to benefit them in a way that directly led to their win. I think everyone's win was ultimately influenced by advantages, but I don't think they played any critical part in that. I think that it was more advantages were a disadvantage to someone else. And I think that is the core problem. Whereas Marianne's game stands out apart from everyone else in terms of advantages, because she's the only one to have successfully used multiple advantages in a way that ultimately led to her winning the game at the end. And it wasn't people having advantages like last season and then being targets to be voted out, or people using advantages on other people and getting them voted out. And so they're collateral, but the person who does that move ends up being voted out anyways. And so it creates a line where someone like Kinsey can go to the end and not have any advantages. No one in that final 3 can have any advantages, like we were talking about off the podcast. So I think that is the core issue here. And where I would really like to see Jeff and the Survivor team iterate and come up with something new. Because I think that the biggest problem with advantages right now is that they don't inherently provide a benefit to a player in actually helping them advance their game to a win. All they do is disadvantage players and ultimately lead players to a loss if they're played on them, and a lot of times if they're holding onto them for too long. So that's where it feels weird.
It almost feels like we need to go back to nothing and like slowly reintroduce what we've already had.
It's just a reset.
Yeah, in order to like find the middle ground, because we've had the very early ages of Survivor where there's no advantages. There's only winning immunity, and that's it. And then we've had now where it's super oversaturated and advantages are becoming disadvantages and an excuse to target someone. And so I feel like we just need to strip down to bare bones and start reintroducing things that have worked to find where the balance is. Because with advantages, it's like a seesaw of having too much and too little. And we're so heavily in the too much side right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a great idea if Survivor wasn't a TV show on network television that ultimately is being funded to drive people to watch and generate revenue via advertising.
Oh, yeah. If it was purely about having
the best game possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do genuinely believe that Jeff and his team want to make the best game possible, but they also are beholden to stakeholders. And so there is always going to be this tension of they want to make the best game possible, but they also need to make a game that changes and stays novel and stays new and fresh, and they can cut in teasers, each week and run promos on network television to get people excited for the next week. Like, if they just went back to nothing and there were no new things each week, what do they do to really get people to watch and get people excited?
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately what it comes down to. And so that's what makes it really tough. But I do think, I think it would be really fun if Survivor 50, they don't tell anyone, but there's no advantages. And maybe they just do it for one season, but it lets them have kind of an internal refresh and let Survivor 50 just be straight up Survivor. And you don't tell them there's no advantages, so they're looking and they think people have advantages. And the whole time that's really in the back of their mind. And they're just like, we know someone has an idol. We don't know who has it. And everyone's paranoid, but there's nothing in the game. And no one knows that until the end. And they probably start thinking that by a little bit into the merge, maybe. They're like, I legitimately don't think that there are idols in this game, but there's going to be doubters because that's not possible. They would think that. I think that is probably the most interesting thing they could do. I don't think they'll do that.
No, there's no way.
There's no shot. But I feel like that's the most interesting thing they could do. I think they could do other twists, in terms of in challenges and rewards and shaking up tribes. Find other things to make twisty, but don't hide any advantages for just that one season. Then reintroduce them back in. Because no one in 51 will have even seen 50. It's not going to matter. So they're not going to know that was what happened. Right? So what does it matter? So I think that would be amazing. I do not expect that at all. But one can dream. Getting to the actual episode itself, though, I think the best place to really start is just right at the beginning and the fallout after the Rome vote, which really there's no fallout because everybody was on the same page. The only fallout, which I kind of expected, and speaking of Steven he played on Survivor Tocantins and went back for, I think, another season as well. But he was saying last week after that episode that he would be very surprised if there wasn't some fallout on Andy's side because his name was thrown out, especially because it was thrown out by Sam, who was supposed to be his ally. And he didn't understand why Sam did that. And he felt like that was a huge misstep for Sam's game. And people online were saying, no, we're totally dismissing his thought on that online. And then he felt pretty vindicated this week whenever because there was the teaser clip came out of that opening segment. And so I was able to see his response to that and be like, I told you all there's going to be some fallout from this. And so I think they are setting up fallout because nothing paid off from all of this airtime that Andy gets at the beginning of this episode. But we do get a lot of time for Andy to learn that Sam was the one who made him the backup vote, who he thought was his number one. And now he's learned he doesn't have anyone. And he needs to forge relationships. So he goes and connects with the other people who don't have a number one, which is Genevieve and Saul, wants to start building some relationships and realizes Gada does not have his back, and he's going to have to go after Sam and Sierra. And that's kind of where it ends. We don't see any more of that. I thought there's a good chance that plays out. Whenever I saw the tribe split up, I was like, oh yeah, that's why we got that start. We're going to see fireworks. It's going to be Sam or Sierra. That didn't happen. I think we're going to see that in the next episode or two. What are your thoughts on... Ultimately, it's just the fallout from Andy being the backup vote.
Yeah, my main takeaway was Genevieve is so good. Why was she not shown if she's going to be doing this much? Why did we literally sit on her for 3 episodes of seeing zero from her?
Yeah, it was in 3 episodes. She had 3 confessionals total. One of those had 0.
To where now I'm like, I think she wins. I think right now, her and Andy are in my, they're going to Final Tribal. I think that they are 2 of the 3 seats at Final Tribal right now.
So Genevieve, I could see a case for sitting at Final Tribal maybe, but it is very hard. It's hard to put money on someone who threw up a 0.
I know.
That just hasn't happened. The only time that has happened is Erica. And that was 41. And we can't take anything that happened in 41 seriously because 41 broke all the rules as far as what we expect from the edit. And the edit isn't everything either, because also Marianne wasn't expected to be the winner until that was leaked. And then Gabler defied all conventions of the edit for the most part, except for one of the most important things, which is the theme of the whole season. And Gabler aligns a lot with the theme when you watch it, having that in mind. All that said, it's really hard to consider Genevieve seriously having a 0. That's why once I realized she had a 0, she's just out of contention immediately. And we see her go home this week, and I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I just think it's funny. Everyone on Survivor Twitter is she's unironically the best player of the new era. I think her trying to pick up Andy as a potential ally is risky, but it feels like high risk, high reward because he's sloppy, which is obvious because of the amount of the mess that he's gotten himself into literally from the first episode. And even in this episode, when he was looking for an advantage, when literally everyone's there, everyone is looking at you, sifting through the...
Everyone was asleep except for Sierra, who had the hat over her head or whatever, but it had mesh. And he didn't realize that she could see him. And then she said something and everybody else opened their eyes.
But it's still
But
doing that in front of literally everyone, while they're there.
It was very unsubtle.
Yes.
I could understand if he was looking for a drink, but when you start lifting up the trays and looking underneath them, at that point, you're looking for a scroll, bro. You've given up being secretive about it.
I think that it could be a situation where Andy becomes really, really loyal to Genevieve because she's willing to pick him up as an ally and work with him. But it could backfire on Genevieve because of how much of a liability Andy seems. But it's also good because liabilities make very good smoke screens for you. And that Andy can always be said, oh, Andy's the easy vote. Let's not take the easy vote.
Which is, and that's sort of why Sam wanted to keep Andy around. Andy was loyal and Andy's a smokescreen.
So I really liked that interaction.
Moving on past the start of the episode, we get into the immunity challenge and rock draw, which we've already talked about a lot. Here's something I was thinking about during the episode. Would you have liked this challenge more? Because there's 12 people. So you could divide this group of 12 into 2 groups, 4 groups, or 3 groups. I don't know why I said them in that order. You could divide them into 2 groups, 3 groups, or 4 groups. Do you like it more if they are divided differently? And maybe, if you divided them into 3 and only one of them is safe, and 2 of them go to 2 separate smaller tribals, or 1 tribal with all of them, or something like where it's a smaller portion that are safe instead of half of them being safe. Does that make it better? Or
I wish
you just hate the split, some safe, some not structure altogether?
I don't mind if it's going to split, probably what I enjoy most is you split into the 2 winners from each group get individual immunity, and the winner of the one who lasts the longest between the 2 winners gets a reward for their group, but everybody else still goes to tribal. So basically what we had with this one, but then Teeny and Genevieve would have kept battling it out to see who would win between them. One of them gets individual immunity. Their group still goes to the reward, but then all of them still go to tribal that night, and everybody's still on the chopping block. That's how I would like to see that ran.
Yeah, so not a split tribal, still one big tribal, but a split reward with 2 safe players.
Yes.
So you're not in favor of a split tribal at all?
No, I don't like split tribal.
Okay. That's kind of what I wanted to see, is if there was ever a scenario where a split tribal feels okay.
I think my issue with the split tribal is it's hard because you need randomness in Survivor, and randomness has an inherent unfairness to it, but I think there are levels of unfairness, if that makes sense. There's randomness in terms of what tribe you're going to get put on at the very start.
Yeah, not really. Actually, I would say there's probably no randomness in that.
I'm saying randomness in that you don't have any say.
Yeah, but just because you don't have say doesn't make it random. It makes it appear random, but I would say what tribe you're put on is incredibly not random. It is explicitly planned and scripted.
I know, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would say the randomness is more in the outcome of your tribe mates, right? You can't control who your tribe mates are.
That's I'm saying it's random that you
can't control the dynamic. I think it's less the people and more how those relationships are going to form. It's random that Yanu ended up being a disaster. That randomness is, I think, is true randomness. Not the fact that they were all put on Yanu, but the dynamics between them.
I'm saying that's it feels like controlled randomness, but then it's hard to say that things are unfair, but the split tribal feels unfair to me.
Okay.
It doesn't feel fair.
Here's where I would add. So Jeff would counter with a rock draw. It's perfectly fair. because you're drawing rocks, completely random, perfectly fair. Here's where I would propose, let's make it less fair in order to make it more fair. What if you did split tribal, but we're going to do a schoolyard draft, just like they did last episode, but there is no conversations among the tribe, right? So it's you pick who you want on your team, they pick the next person, but you can't talk to them. Like there's no conversation, no looking, no glances, none of that. It's just you pick them, they come over, they pick the next person, they pick. And so you are immediately responsible for everyone who could potentially be going to tribal with you. And so there's randomness in that you can only control one person who comes with you, technically. They control one. And so there's randomness as it goes down the line to an extent. Or if you're the last person chosen, it's kind of random where you go, right? Because it's sort of a 50-50 at that point. So there is randomness, but it's controlled in the fact that the players now have control over their destiny and they're taking it into their hands. And now you have some strategy. Do I want to take the strongest people who are going to give us the best chance at winning this challenge, but they might be my allies? And there's a chance that they could go home, but I definitely need my allies, right? Because I need votes. But what if only one of them, like Rachel, is left over on the other side? So we kind of need an even split, depending on how many there are. You have to work out the numbers. You also don't know who the next person's going to pick. And so you're risking, if you don't pick your ally, there's a chance that none of your allies are picked down the line. And so it starts this sort of, there's a lot of strategy and a lot of questioning, I think, that could come up. The biggest thing is that you ultimately have some ownership over who goes with you to tribal. It's not technically random. You made that choice. I think if you were going to do that, you would have to do a bigger challenge. I don't think you could just do the holding, balancing thing like they did here. I think you'd have to do probably a more multi-stage challenge. But I bring that up because I want to see, like, does that feel better? Or would that still be like, no, it's still the same thing?
No, I feel like schoolyard drafts in general feel more fair to me, while still also having a lot of strategy involved, because I don't think the elimination of randomness gets rid of danger in the game.
Mm-hmm. I think it adds more danger.
Yeah, because whenever you're doing that schoolyard pick, you need to balance, do I want to pick someone who I think is going to help me win this challenge? Or do I want to pick someone that if I lose, I need an ally with me? And then also, you also kind of have to balance the thing of who is the person that I'm going to pick.
That, and I'm even thinking they're post-merge, so they're thinking about winning the game. And so if you're thinking your side is going to win, you don't necessarily want to have someone who you think can win the game on your side, or at least that's got to be in the back of your mind. And so I think there's so many things running through your head all at once, and you've got probably 30 seconds to make a decision. And then the next person, and then the next person, and you're just going through it. And so with that, I think it's at least more interesting than a rock draw. I think that there are still drawbacks, but there's drawbacks to either side. And so where the fact that at least this one is strategic, I like it more.
That's what I don't like about randomness, and I think that's what I was trying to convey poorly, is that randomness in the new era feels like an elimination of strategy. It is unfair to certain levels, but not unfairness aside, I think the randomness that gets implemented results in an elimination of strategy and does not heighten the strategy of the players. And that's what I don't like about the randomness, is it eliminates the strategy of the game.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that a lot of the things that they're trying to throw in, especially like with the beware advantages, they're trying to encourage strategy. But I feel like all the best strategy in Survivor happens on its own because of how good the game is and the organic nature of Survivor and the game that was built and the community that is formed between these people. That's where I think the best strategy has always revealed itself. And so, yes, there are these really great idle plays that are very cool and have made for really awesome Survivor moments. And, you know, you can have people with multiple idols and all sorts of things, and they're really flashy and really showy, and they'll get shared around online. But when you look at the grand, like the whole timeline, the sacred timeline of Survivor from beginning to end, those are few and far between. The meat of it, the Survivor strategy that's happening episode to episode, and the really big memorable moments don't involve advantages at all.
And if you look at all 40, how many winners have we had? 44 winners. How many of them have won from social games? I'd say well over half. I'd say probably over 3/4 of them have won purely based on social strategy and not based on how well they used advantages and played idols and things like that to make it fun in the game.
Usually idols and stuff don't factor that much into the ultimate decision of whether someone wins or loses. It really doesn't, like it makes a difference sometimes, and sometimes it can be the thing that pushes someone over the edge if it's a close race between two players. But I would agree. I'd say at the end of the day, it's just who played the best game.
And I think it's another issue that has kind of evolved from advantages is players tend to see advantages of how can I use this to make a flashy move to bolster my resume.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot. Mm-hmm.
Instead of looking at an advantage as a way to progress in the game. And I think that's a fundamental issue because like hidden immunity idols used to almost more be seen as like a lifeline and
they were
not
hidden.
be
and they were designed to be a secret
and not seen as a way to make a flashy move by playing it on yourself when like to get someone else out or playing it on your ally to get someone else out. They used to feel like they were your last resort in the game. Like what Shot in the Dark is now is what hidden immunity idols used to feel like in the early stages of the Survivor.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point, is that idols have become so big and flashy that they had to implement a new lifeline because no one really thinks about them as a lifeline. And I think we saw that on display last season where people weren't playing their idols because they were holding on to it, waiting for the perfect moment to play it. And it wasn't like normally you would just, if you were worried, you would play it. It was a gut reaction where it was like, I don't think I'm safe. I need to play this. And now it's, you hold on to it and it's too late. And I think that's going to change after 46 now, for sure. And so we might start getting back into the older era a little bit. But I think that's a really good point that I haven't thought about a whole lot in the way that idols are perceived has definitely changed. And I think that it's just like the power of idols is different. At least super idols aren't a thing anymore. So that's nice.
Super idols?
Yeah, you haven't seen those seasons. Super idols.
What are super idols?
You need to go watch Koa Wrong. There's super idols in that season.
Super idols?
Yeah.
What the frick?
Yeah, super idols. Okay. I legitimately think we're going to get a super beware advantage. After Charlie brought that up, Jeff was so excited about that in the One on Fire where Charlie brought that up that I legitimately think Jeff's going to put that in. So I think there's going to be a super beware advantage now. Anyways, here's another question. Do you like I'm kind of going back to the whole split conversation because this made me think of something else. Do you like the split a little bit better if they're not isolated from one another? If after their meal, the 6 who are safe get to rejoin the 6 who are going to tribal. So at least, even though it's 5 Tuku and 1 Gata, at least they can kind of maneuver and wheel and deal for like trying to make their case why someone should go home or should stay.
I feel like
where, for me, that's the hardest part of the split tribal is the isolation.
I feel like it makes more sense to do it that way because you're merged.
Yeah. And there's not a second vote, right? Before it made sense because it was 2 votes. Now, let them go have the reward. They can't influence the vote in terms of them actually casting a vote. And maybe they don't even get to speak at tribal. They don't get to participate. That could be fine too. Let them still sit off over in the corner. But I would have really liked to see how the dynamics play out on this beach. I would have been really interested to see if Gata would have gone to bat for Rachel, or if they would have been like, honestly, it's all right, let her go home. Or if Tiana could have gotten some of the people who are safe on her side to convince Caroline to flip on Gabe. Like, I think there's a lot more interesting dynamics at play, even though people don't have votes, because sure, your vote is your life in Survivor, but we've seen people without votes influence the game before. And so just because they're not voting because they're safe doesn't mean they couldn't have some sort of an impact on that decision, which I think is why they're not playing a part in it, is because they don't want them to have an impact. But I wonder if them having an impact is better.
But if that was the case, then we wouldn't have people losing their votes left and right. So I think it makes sense for them to go back to the same beach, because then it has more direct impact in the aftermath in terms of understanding what dynamics are at play. And so it makes more sense, in my opinion, in the post-merge for them to be together. Like, and honestly, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't see I don't get Jeff's vision for the reason why they're split. I don't see what the advantage is in terms of making it more interesting for the players. I don't see what is being accomplished, in all honesty.
Yeah. I think there is an interesting element to the whole idea of, they don't know and it's all sort of revealed to them later and then they have to play catch up on it. But they don't really know these people. And so it's not as impactful because of the way the tribes were split up. If it was a more even split down the middle in terms of the tribes, it might be more interesting, right? If you had all 3 tribes represented there at tribal, maybe it's more interesting. But the nature of it just being 5v1, I don't think that any of them, like, there's no tea for them to get when they get back home. Like, they're just going to be like, all right, because they saw it all unfold in front of them. They kind of knew the conversations that happened all day. There's nothing new for them to learn. They don't need to get caught up. So there's really nothing's going to happen. So I guess then we've already kind of talked about the advantage, which was the next thing that happened, Saul finding that. And then really we just have tribal council, where Rachel ultimately is the one who receives the advantage from Saul, chooses to take the safety without power, which is the right decision in her scenario. 1,000,000%. You take that, you get out of there, you get the best of both worlds. For her, it was safety with power. Like, that is the most OP advantage in her scenario, by far. Yeah. It's more powerful than an immunity idol.
The only slight of it is that it's not like a move for her.
I guess, yeah.
A resume booster.
It's a move for Saul.
Yeah. And that she could have used the vote blocker to try to get one of them out, but then it has a chance of backfiring and she could still go home. Using this advantage is it was honestly insanely overpowered because she gets to leave and Atuku is guaranteed to go home.
Yes. And so that's what she does. She leaves. We have a live tribal. There's conversations back and forth. And then this is where I think really from here on out is where we can have kind of the rest of our conversation and then turn into talking about players, like their prospects for the rest of the game. There were a few interesting things that were revealed at Tribal, and especially in this live Tribal, that I think were really interesting and I think are really telling about who actually has a chance at going far in this game. And I'm curious if you agree or disagree. I think we saw a really new side of Caroline in this.
I do too.
Caroline has been very consistent in getting confessionals. She's averaging low number of confessionals every episode, but she's been very consistent in getting confessionals. So she is textbook under the radar edit is where she's sitting at. It's not as under the radar as Marianne, but very textbook for that archetype of winner. She's averaging 2 an episode. So very low number that she's averaging. And even in this episode, she only got 3. But the strategy that we're seeing from her play out on screen is starting to get more and more complex. And we're starting to really see, I likened her to Emily Flippin before the season started. And I think we're seeing some of that like analytical, like that sort of comparison that I drew. I think we saw that.
She had a really good comment that she talked to Tiana about. Her and Tiana were talking, and they were talking about the fact that they may not want to send Rachel home because if they do send Rachel home, then it's a 6 versus 5, and all the 6 people are going to attack the Tukus. And so Tiana and Caroline are talking about potentially getting out someone else so that they don't look super unified and so that they don't all get attacked. And Caroline was kind of against it because she said they may attack us, but they're not going to attack us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's like, they're going to go after Kyle if he doesn't win immunity.
Mm-hmm.
And if he does, they're going to go after Gabe.
I think Caroline is actually playing a very solid game.
Yeah, I think she's playing a very solid game. She has a very strong number 1 in Sue. She has working allyship with Gabe. I don't think she's thrilled about it. I think she sees right through Gabe, but she's willing to work with him because Sue wants to work with him. And right now it's what's best for her game. But I think she's not afraid to slit Gabe's throat when the time comes, and ultimately like just go for the jugular, make a big and smart move, which she had that whole moment in Tribal that I think was a really big, if she ends up being a contender down the line and being a potential winner, I think people are going to come back to this Tribal and that moment where she's talking about a flashy move versus like a smart move.
Which is 100% what
Very
we've
correct.
talked about so much.
That's why I wanted to kind of get here and talk about it, because it's literally what we've been talking about this episode. And she's voicing something that a lot of fans have been complaining about with this new era. And so the fact that she's thinking that through, it could be a little bit of a concern that people might interpret that as, oh man, she's playing the game. But it's also sort of common sense stuff. But it does clearly show that she's thinking about the game in the right way. And so I think she's got herself in a really good position. Her number 1 ally has an idol, which is something I'll talk about in a minute because that factors into the whole 0 confessional thing. So we'll have a whole minute to talk about Sue here in a little bit. But I think Caroline's in a really, really good spot. And so, spoiler alert, she makes an appearance in the power rankings this week, for sure. Another interesting thing that I feel like was very clear in this episode, like Gabe has always been kind of a jerk. Like that's been pretty clear on screen, that he views people as pawns and is not afraid to say that. And I think that this episode, and in particular, a statement he said in the live Tribal to Kyle, it really like irked me when
the wounded bird comment.
No, when he said that Sue is an effing something. I don't remember, but he dropped an F-bomb. They bleeped it. She'll do whatever we want. Tiana is unpredictable, basically. But like,
I want to say he just said that she's effing loyal.
No, I don't think he said loyal. I remember it being, I feel like it was pretty negative because I remember being surprised. Like the way it came across was very demeaning in tone. And in general, the way he talks about his allies and the relationships he's built, which is consistent with what he said at the beginning, is he's not there to make friends. He's there to win Survivor. He is treating these people sort of like they are just pieces of a game. And so I am very worried for him and his game that that's going to catch up with him and people are going to start to realize it. And a lot of people already are. And the person who has seen through it the whole time, Tiana, is gone now. And so I think Gabe is, now that like Rome, who was kind of the quote unquote villain of this season, is gone. I think Gabe is now shifting into that role and is really playing up that character and really wanting to sort of be the villain. We kind of said that in our draft when we were analyzing the players and stuff.
I went and found what Gabe said. He said, Sue will do whatever we effing want.
Yes.
We can't control T.
Yes, that was what it was. And it was the way he said, like that phrase, she will do whatever we want, feels very, it feels incredibly misogynistic. And the way he said it, and is very controlling. He doesn't view it as an equal partnership, not a we're on the same level allies, right? We're not working together. It's I've got Sue in my pocket. And I mean, at the beginning of the game, he was like, I knew I was going to come in here and I wanted to find the oldest lady that I could and align with her right away. And so like from the beginning, he's been wanting to take advantage of people who are in a vulnerable position. You know, the oldest woman's usually the first one to go. He's like, I want to take advantage of that person, bring them in as an ally. Now I have a number one, which, yes, it's smart, but he's also not treating them like a person all the time. Like, he's obviously being nice enough that she wants to stay around, but behind the scenes, he doesn't really care. And so Kyle doesn't like him at all. Kyle ultimately votes with him because he knows he can't sway Caroline. But I think it's going to come back and hurt Gabe in the long run. So I think between Gabe and Caroline, those were two things that really stood out to me from this tribal specifically. I don't know if there was anything else from this tribal that stood out to you among like the answers to questions or the live tribal interactions or anything else.
The last two things that I want to talk about before we like talk about people's rankings in the game is Tiana's really emotional exit.
Yep.
Because it was really crushing, but it felt real and it felt like real Survivor. Because honestly, I was getting really fed up with the Kumbaya crap that we had in like 45 where people would get voted out and they're like, good game, bye, see ya, we're going to be besties later. I really like raw Survivor where their dream just got crushed. And that's a real part of Survivor where in order to progress yourself in this game, you have to crush someone else's dream. So seeing that played out, I think is really impactful. So that's something that I'm really liking about this season is it feels real.
Add on to that really briefly. I think part of what also made that feel so real is that she had the really emotional moment beforehand where she was both emotional about the fact that she could be going home, but she was also emotional about the fact that she didn't even want to write down Gabe's name. She didn't like Gabe, but she went to tribal that night not planning on writing down Gabe's name, which is why I think that whole thing ultimately happened. Like, she ultimately had that sort of like emotional moment because like she wasn't in a mental headspace to write down his name. She wanted him to go home, but it's still hard to like you're in it and giving your all, you know that they want it too. And so it's still hard to send them home, even though you don't want them to be there with you. And so she just wasn't prepared to be doing that. She's been out there with him for several days at this point. They've been there for what? Like, is this day 11, 12, something like that maybe?
I think it's 13.
So even more. I mean, almost 2 weeks now that they've been out there 24/7 for 2 weeks. That was really emotional, where she was hurting not just for herself, but for someone who she's been pretty vocal that she doesn't particularly like.
Mm-hmm.
The empathy that she was experiencing there, only for that to be immediately followed up by all 4 of them voting her out, was really tough. And I think that it hits pretty hard following Annika's a couple weeks ago. And then Asia's was also emotional in a little bit of a different way, but feeling, betrayed. And then Kishan had a emotional exit in terms of just like surprise and shock. And I agree, this whole season has felt everyone's reactions have felt like very real and genuine.
The last thing I want to hit on is the fact that Tiana doesn't make the jury.
Yeah, that is really tough.
And I'm going to be completely honest, it feels like a really big slap in the face to the players to merge and then not make the jury, honestly. I don't see what the point is other than to just add some risk factor for the players, but it doesn't add any entertainment value to me as a viewer other than to think, dang, that really sucks for Tiana that she missed the jury by 1 vote. It doesn't add it doesn't make me enjoy the show more. It honestly makes me enjoy it kind of less.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why they merge essentially 2 episodes early. I feel like the merge should be next week when the jury starts.
Yeah.
If they're wanting to do a jury at 8.
I don't understand why we need to merge at 13. It doesn't make sense. Like, if we're going to do the earn the merge where that person who gets voted out at the fake merge doesn't make the jury, that's fine. But then don't have another vote after where that person doesn't make a jury. Just don't merge for 2 more votes. Merge what happened this episode, that this should be merged now. We should be a merged tribe now.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels incredibly unsatisfying when they have earned their merge buff. They're wearing it. They're among the merge tribe. And then they still don't get to go on the jury. Because that's kind of like everyone's goal obviously is to win, but only one person wins. And so you're going out there with the next best thing is like bucket list. Like, I want to at least make the jury, because then you get to stay out there. You don't have to go home right away. Like, you get to at least be out there the full 27 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so it definitely, it really sucks. I would very much prefer they keep it in the tribe stage for 2 more episodes. And if one of the tribes is dwindling down, you swap them. You swap them up, put them on 2 tribes. We've talked about this before. But I don't see any point in merging them only, after 5 episodes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't see any reason to do that. With all that being said, let's talk power rankings. And I think I'll start that all off with my number 5. I was considering dropping her out completely, but I'm going to leave her there for now because I think there's a good chance she could still make the final 3 or final 4. And this is me trying to kind of like find the final 5 is really where I'm at now that we're merged.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got Sue at 5. And I was like, man, I don't even think she has a shot at winning, but I think that she will make it deep because she's getting so much screen time and she is aligning with like the theme of this season so much, which is like the theme very clearly seems to be underestimating people and underdogs. And she just has been one of the most clear examples of that this season in the edit. But she got 0 confessionals this episode with an idol in her pocket going to tribal. I don't know how you get 0 confessionals when you're going to tribal, much less when you're going to tribal with an idol in your pocket. That seems outrageous that you wouldn't get a single confessional in the whole episode and that you wouldn't come up in the conversation at all. Like, the only thing I can think of is that her idol was still buried over on the other beach, so the idol didn't come up. That's fine. But still, you're going to tribal. Everyone on that tribe should get a confessional. And so the fact that she didn't really hurts her chances of being the winner, I think. Because if she's the winner, you don't want to pull her out of the eye of the viewer.
Yeah. My opinion of Sue also fell this episode because I think her edit just seems to be relegated to being Gabe's pawn and not her own player. She's not making moves for herself.
Yeah.
She's making Gabe's moves for him.
Yeah. It definitely feels like she's working for Gabe, working with Caroline. But neither of those are like her alliances. It's like Caroline's alliance and Gabe's alliance, and they've kind of got this trio that's sort of happening, but Gabe and Caroline are on top, and Sue's on the bottom of this triangle. I'm trying to make the triangle on my screen. Sue's on the bottom. So I have Sue at 5. I think she will continue to go far. I expect her to be close to the end of the game. And I think she could even sit at final 3. Like, that wouldn't surprise me. But I do not think she's going to win. At 4, re-entering the top 5, I have Sierra again. And this is a little bit of a weird one because she got like no screen time in this one. But this is sort of me looking at all the options that we have available. Because now we have a really narrow list of who actually has a chance of winning. So I'm actually just going to read through the rest of my list and then I can kind of talk about them all together. So I've got Sierra at 4, Gabe at 3. I don't know if I actually think Gabe makes final tribal or not, but I've got him at 3 for now. Andy at 2, and then Caroline at 1. Teeny, I have dropped out. Sam, I have dropped out.
I think Genevieve
I have dropped out as honorable mention just on the cusp.
I think Genevieve deserves to be in there more than Andy.
Genevieve has a 0 bomb. Andy has been heavy in the edit the entire season, and Andy has a mat chat. So those are all big things going for Andy. This season, the mat chats were Teeny, Gabe, Andy, John Lovett.
I think John also had one.
And then one more. I don't remember the other one. But there was one more there. I think it's someone else who left already. But regardless, it is usually pretty telling. Andy has just been so prevalent. I don't think Andy's going to win. I think there's pretty much a 0. I'm not going to say 0. I think there's a 1 to 2% chance Andy actually wins. I think him getting the mid-season interview is pretty bad for his odds. That's outside of the game. So I hate that I'm even considering that. But the fact that he got that is pretty bad. I don't think you would give that to the winner of the season with is it with Entertainment Weekly or whatever? But he had that mid-season interview that Hunter got last season. Mm-hmm. That one, that's pretty rough, but it almost guarantees that he's going to go pretty far to get that. And he's notable. So him getting that makes me think he's not going to win. He also feels very much like a 0 vote finalist. His story aligns with he reminds me so much of like a Ben or a Jake or I'm trying to think who else from this new era that was 0 vote finalist.
Carolyn.
Yes, Carolyn feels like that. Just very much he feels like textbook. No, nobody takes him seriously. He's going to go all the way to the final 3. He's going to make his case, and still no one's going to take him seriously and vote for him. I think that's how it's going to end up. So I think he'll be in the final 3. I don't think he's going to get any votes. I have Caroline up here because I think she's just the dark horse winner right now, as being like throwing my shot at a dartboard, hoping maybe I'm right. I would have not seen this coming last week, but I think that there's been a little bit of a pivot in the game where it feels like this kind of makes a lot of sense. I wanted to have Teeny in the top 5 because I think Teeny also fits the underdog narrative, but Teeny has had super consistent confessionals and has had a pretty good amount, but I almost feel like Teeny's being shown too much now, where it's almost not even relevant to be showing Teeny, like it's feeling forced. And so it makes me think Teeny's going to be a target in a couple episodes. So that's why I didn't include Teeny. And then so the reason
I see
why
I envision Teeny being a threat, being perceived as a threat in the near future.
Yeah. So that's ultimately why I have Teeny just on the outside. And then the reason that I have Gabe in here still, because I think I could see Gabe making it to the end and people not voting for him as the winner because of the way that he played the game and, going Caroline over Gabe. I could see that 3 going to the final 4, Sue not making it to the 3, Andy makes it because Andy beats Sue in fire or whatever. There could be some interesting things that happen there. I think there's a lot of opportunity where Gabe could still make it to the end, but I don't think Gabe is the winner. I just don't think he's being framed that way. But I think he's a strong contender to make it to the end of the game, but not an actual contender. And then I have Sierra here because I still think, even with all of this, she feels right now like a consistent, in the same vein as Caroline, dark horse, but even of like a deeper pool, because she's not getting any strategic screen time right now. So she would need a significant pivot in her edit, but I feel more confident putting her in here than I do anyone else. The only other person that I was considering was maybe Rachel as another dart throw, but I think Rachel's just too far on the bottom to really claw her way back. So that was a long-winded explanation for my order that I have. But to recap it, I have Caroline, Andy, Gabe, Sierra, Sue. It's very different from what I've had in the past. I know that you feel like Genevieve should be in there. Is there anyone else that you feel like should be in consideration for the final 3 at Tribal? Or what would your final 3 look like if you were to just predict it right now?
I don't even know. I feel like Andy makes it to the final Tribal. I think
Andy's a lock to make it to final Tribal.
He does feel like the classic no vote finalist.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't feel like he's making moves. He feels like he's like narrating the game.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like he's making moves. It's so hard to... We're still so far out.
That's where it's hard. And I mean, some people want to consider Kyle. Kyle's also had a 0 confessional episode. And so I kind of don't want to consider Kyle. Kyle had 1 confessional, 0, 1. Like, he was non-existent. The recurring joke was, and then Kyle's just there. Now Kyle has appeared. He's still not getting... 2 weeks ago, he had a lot more confessionals. Last week, he had a lot more confessionals. This week, he only had 2. I think he's just prominent because he's winning immunity. I think ultimately, he's going to go the second he doesn't win immunity. I think that's probably what they're going to take that route where they're going to be, oh my goodness, he has won the only 2 individual immunities we've had. He's won them both. And they'll just vote out Kyle soon after, within a couple episodes. He's just not getting enough screen time for me to take seriously as a winner, and he's too dominant too early in immunities. Saul, maybe if something happens with the move he made. Rachel,
I was about to say, the thing that I feel like is hard is it's so early in the pre-merge that no one's really been making moves.
Yeah.
So it's hard to predict who is going to rise to the top.
Yeah.
Because no one's really making moves yet.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. It'll be interesting to see how it moves forward. But that's kind of where I'm thinking right now. And we'll see going forward. Definitely think Andy's in the final 3, but I don't think he's winning. It'll be interesting to see who beats Andy at the end. Maybe that's instead of power rankings, it's who will beat Andy.
Well, we have talked a lot
Yes.
this episode. There was a lot to talk about. But do you have anything else you want to say about the pickle that was put on blast?
I have nothing to say about Tuku's pickle being put on blast.
All right. Well, with that, we will wrap up this episode, this recap episode of Survivor 47. If you enjoyed listening, we would really appreciate a rating/review as it helps our podcast grow. You can check us out on social media at Idle Talk Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter/X. We have some hit tweets now. And you can listen to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.